Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. All right, time for Sharp or Square. My buddy Chad Millman, co-host of The Favorites, all odds provided by DraftKings. You know, listen, the college football games this weekend won't get the NFL numbers because nothing in the world does, but there's some heaters, and we'll get to that in about 15 minutes. There's some fascinating games. I mean, I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense because he's been so good, but if Ryan Day loses at home to Tennessee, it's going to be a shitstorm in Columbus. It's going to be crazy. So we'll get to that in 15 minutes. Let's do Sharp or Square. I've had a terrible year. I've had my worst year ever doing this. And I don't really know. I don't want to outthink the room. I'm about 55% every year. I'm not a pro gambler, but I think I'm, in the ballpark. I've been terrible this year. And I can't, I think a lot of it is I've always liked value and underdogs. And it just week to week. Some weeks I go dogs, favorites win. Some week I go favorites. So I'm just going to give you my thought on this. The Chiefs are now 3.5-point favorites. It's more stay away now, but when it was 2.5, even with Carson Wentz potentially playing, I loved Kansas City. I think Carson Wentz for a week is fine. For a season, you can't trust his health. So I would imagine at 3.5, the sharps like the Texans. But if so, I liked it 2.5 and 3 Kansas City. Now, if I say I like Kansas City, is it
Totally
square?
Yeah, the wise guys are playing the 3.5 because up until last weekend, anytime you're betting on Patrick Mahomes as a more than 3-point favorite, you're making a negative ROI bet. He just has not won as a favorite of more than 3. Last weekend, obviously, he did. They were 4.5-point favorites. They covered. But even in that game, you saw the pressure getting to Mahomes consistently. You saw them lose the Browns because Jameis Winston had 2 interceptions in the end zone that were from in the Chiefs end zone from about his 30-yard line. So killing 2 drives. Plus they had 3 other turnovers, including to open the game. You look at that game, the defense gave up 7 points, right? And so that game was closer statistically than you would imagine by the score itself. So there is going to be a sentiment. You take the Texans at plus 3.5. At 2.5, 100%, people were still taking the Chiefs. That's why the number got all the way up to 3.5.
Yeah. So a prime example, the Steelers get beat and pretty soundly by Philadelphia. But what's lost in that game is they had 80 yards in the first half and only trailed 17-13 in Philly. If Najee Harris doesn't fumble, we got ourselves a football game. To give the Steelers 6.5, you know what the Ravens are? They're the Mike Tyson. They're bullies. First round knockouts against bad teams. You push them back, you make them think. Baltimore can get beat by a lot of good teams. Pittsburgh pushes back. Tomlin is a 6.5-point underdog. This to me is the steal of the week. Pittsburgh plus 6.5 at Baltimore.
Yeah,
Sharp or
wise
square?
guys love this bet. And it's almost become a blind bet in this series. Wise guys like Mike Tomlin as an underdog anyways. And you're right, that game, Najee Harris, the Steelers were outplayed. And in the middle of the third quarter, if he doesn't
They were
fumble the ball,
totally in the
if he doesn't
game.
fumble the ball, they're on the 16-yard line. They're at least kicking a field goal to make it a 2016 game, or they're scoring a touchdown
Yeah.
to make it 2020. Changes the game, right? Mike Tomlin, rah-rah spots. Any way you slice and dice it, Mike Tomlin as an underdog is the best coach in a generation against the spread. He is best coach in a generation winning straight up as an underdog in this series, specifically as a dog of 3 or more versus the Ravens. He is 6-0 straight up, or 6-0 against the spread. He's 13-2-2 against the spread versus Harbaugh. When the line in this series is 3 or more points the past 20 years, so it's the Harbaugh Tomlin reign, the underdog is 23-4-3 against the spread. Since 2015, underdog 16-2-1 against the spread. So, there are times where you're nervous about playing into these trends. And we talked about this on the show last week, betting the Steelers fading the Chiefs, those were times we were nervous. Like it happened 6 times out of 10. This time it's happening 8 times out of 10. So yeah, you're playing the Steelers.
Um, I like the 49ers +1 at the Dolphins. I think one of the things that's become pretty clear with the Dolphins is if they're not playing in oppressive humidity at home, they get pushed around by more physical teams. I think they're the ultimate finesse team in this league. And, as I watch them against Houston, it's just bubble screens. That's all they do. Tua is now throwing 40 times a game. That's way too much for Tua. The teams like the Packers and the Eagles have scaled back with more talented quarterbacks to throw 24 times a game. I think the 49ers, I think it comes down to pride. For Brock Purdy, it comes down to a contract. Um, I like the 49ers here, sharp or square.
Sharp-ish. Like the line opened 1.5. It's been bet down, obviously, from 1.5 to 1. For a minute, very hot minute, the Niners were favorites. And then it sort of bounced back a little bit. But that money that's moving it is professional money in favor of the Niners. Not a huge sort of feeling on that game. They just sort of think that the Niners are probably a more physical team. Are they getting more healthy? They don't believe in the Dolphins is the bigger component of their thinking.
Okay, the Colts were dominating the Broncos until Jonathan Taylor. I mean, it was a blowout. They go home now and have to swallow 3.5. But the Titans they have bench Will Levis. I was texting a GM this week and I said, I think if you gave Sam Darnold to the Colts, they have the Viking season. I like their personnel. I mean, I haven't seen anybody this year, including the Chiefs, push the Broncos around, especially in Denver. I mean, it was a mismatch. 3 picks for Bo Nix. I think Indy, I don't care what the line is. I think they're going to come back. I think Chris Ballard's job's on the line. Anthony Richardson's career's on the line. Shane Steichen with that trick play that got a pick 6. I think Indy is inflamed, and I think they blow the Titans out, sharp or square.
So the wise guys are on Tennessee. This line was at 4.5, even when Will Levis was possibly the quarterback. It's been bet down immediately with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback. The wise guys have liked the Titans a lot this year. They've also liked the Colts this year. Their biggest fear is betting Anthony Richardson as a favorite.
Right.
Like, if you want to talk about comps, the comps for Anthony Richardson and his completion percentage right now, Tim Tebow and Akili Smith in the past 25 years, this season will go down as one of the worst in completion percentage because of how badly Anthony Richardson is playing. And I think there was a sentiment after he was benched, he came back and he looked like he was a little bit more in control. They were putting him in better positions. He was just awful against the Broncos. They were winning that game in spite of him. And look, like I was on the Colts last week. Jonathan Taylor dropping that ball was gut wrenching. I was on the Steelers last week. Najee Harris dropping that ball. And this was all happening. If you're watching Red Zone, this is like boom, boom, boom. It was just like gut punch after gut punch after gut punch as a bettor. But you felt like, and I felt like the Colts had no chance to get back into that game after they gave up the lead because Anthony Richardson can't win you a game. So they're going to have to dominate on the ground in order to cover this 3.5. And like at the end of the day, you got to win by 4 points. That's a relatively big number in what should be a run heavy game in which the clock is running a lot. So I think the wise guys are still liking Tennessee in the hook.
Um, Part of me says I should love the Bears at home +6.5 against Detroit. Jared Goff outside bad weather. I defended Caleb Williams this week. He has more touchdown passes than Justin Herbert and Kyler Murray, more passing yards than Jalen Hurts, and hasn't had an interception since Halloween. Is that if you just look at the record, you would think he's awful. And it's like, no, actually, all things considered, now that he's with the third coach at home, Detroit defensively, I mean, it's bad. It is, I mean, 8, 9 yards a chunk. I think I like Chicago at home, plus 6.5, sharp
Well,
or
look,
square.
the wise guys like Chicago at home when it was at 7.5 and 7. And this is 100% a number play. You're not going to find anyone taking it at 6.5. If you're taking it at 6.5, we've talked about this. You're just not getting the best of the number. And long term, that's a bad way to try to win games. You might win once in a while, but long term, you want to be on the right side of the number. So the wise guys took the 7.5. They took the 7. I think this is a really tricky game. At 6.5 as a home dog in the division, of course I want to be on the Bears. I can't find a way to get there. I'm not saying I'm going to bet Detroit, but there's two schools of thought on Jared Goff. Jared Goff outside is terrible. Jared Goff indoors is unbeatable. Obviously, that happened last week, so it's a hyperbole, but he tends to cover when he is indoors, tends to not when he is outside, and he is a covering machine over the past 5 years. I look at this in a different way. Sure, their defense is beat up, but all they have to do is hand the ball to Jahmyr Gibbs because this Bears rush defense is just atrocious, like putrid. They are giving up 100 yards every single game, no matter who they play. Saw it again last week against Minnesota. So I do worry that Detroit is going to come out in a bad mood, try to prove that they're still the class of the NFC, run the ball down the Bears' throat, and it doesn't really matter what Caleb Williams does or what the weather is. They might dominate this game. So I can't I can't tell you at 6.5 you're making a good call.
Okay, Rams is now at only -3. I would take them against the Jets. It was 3.5. Um, I think the Jets played the last 2 weeks. Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, have clicked. But the Rams are playing for the playoffs, and the Jets are playing for pride. I mean, between the documentary, between Garrett Wilson wanting a trade, the story about Woody Johnson's kids, this has been a messy week for the Jets. I can gladly swallow the 3 for a much better team and a much more functional offense. Rams -3,
I mean,
sharp or
what? Look,
square.
wise guys have been on the Jets all week. The wise guys have been on the Jets for much of the year, and much to their dismay, Jeff Ulbrich, the coach, seems to find ways to play them out of wins and covers, and then make the stupidest mistakes that actually leads them into a cover that they never should have covered, right? Last week, he's going for the touchdown with a minute left when the Jags have two timeouts. They end up covering the 3-point spread, winning by 6, when really he should have kneeled down and left no time and kicked a field goal. Week before, making bad decisions at the end of the game. They end up losing the game to the Dolphins and not even covering the 3-point spread because they lose by 6 in overtime. So he's a menace when it comes to clock management, and he's a menace for bettors. But the wise guys do love the Jets right now. Aaron Rodgers has been playing significantly better the past 2 weeks. You could argue, well, the old man went to Florida, and when you're old and you're in Florida, you're going to feel better. And now he's got to come back and play in the cold in New Jersey. But there is something about the Rams and the fact that they have to go into the cold too. Stafford does not perform as well then. And also, this is a team you get late in the year. You get teams that are what I like to call good-ish, right? 50 to 60% in terms of winning percentage, and they're playing bad teams on the road. That is a recipe for disaster in terms of covering the spread. I'm not saying they're going to lose, but those games tend to be closer. So the wise guys are definitely back in the Jets this week.
Okay, I'm not prone to do this, but Green Bay -14 against the Saints just screams take the Packers. I thought their win at Seattle was so impressive because I do think Seattle has excellent defensive coaching. This has been a year of the favorites. I think the most underrated player in the league is Jordan Love. I think he's a magnificent talent. I think the Saints feel like a dead franchise. I think Green Bay still has a chance. They really believe it. I think they're a better team this morning or this afternoon than Detroit. I don't like 14-point favorites, but they're covering. and favorites are covering. And I feel like I've got a ascending, young, healthy team against a dead franchise. I think Green Bay is one of the few places where home field is still 3 to 3.5 points, sharp or
Well,
square.
look, you're never going to get uh, sharp confirmation on a 14-point favorite. There are two 14-point favorites this week, the Packers over the Saints, the Bills over the Patriots. There's been more of a conversation around the Bills as 14-point favorites. That line actually ticked up to 14 and a half, and that was very much professionals betting on the Bills at 14. Then it came down. Then some professionals, not a whole lot of them, but a couple of them were like, yeah, that's well, like half a point too far. The Packers, like, sure, there's nobody who's thinking they want to bet on the Saints, but there's not a rush to the window on the Packers. Everything you just said, everyone agrees with. It's why actually the wise guys were on the Packers last week against the Seahawks at -2. And
That was my
yeah,
favorite bet
mine
of the
too.
week.
It's the only
Yeah.
bet I won last week. And so they were on him at 2.5. That was a great spot for the Packers, right? They had just lost a really hard game to the Lions. And I think that game gave them the confidence that you just talked about. You saw the mastery with which LaFleur calls a game. Jordan Love has been much more cautious with the ball, hasn't been throwing interceptions. I think the Packers believe they are in the same class as the Vikings and the Lions and the Eagles, and I'd be hard pressed to disagree. I think it's harder to win as two touchdown favorites against a Saints team that, like, from a wise guy perspective, they just don't like this game as much as they would like the Bills and the Patriots. And I can tell you why they like the Bills against the Patriots, if that would be interesting to you.
Yeah, please.
So this is the win Josh Allen the MVP game, right? There's talk this week because Lamar Jackson threw 5 touchdowns against the Giants that maybe he should be MVP. And you saw the MVP odds shrink a little bit. The Bills tend to blow these teams out anyways, right? They are a team that has a winning record as big favorites in these games, in the division, outside the division, at home. They don't play down to the level of their competition. Their offense can do whatever it wants against the Patriots. If the Patriots are down early, their record against the spread, it's like 7-21 the past 2 years. Like they are a terrible team. They cannot recover. So if the Bills get out to a lead early, which they tend to do, it's a great spot. The one concern is, the Bills secondary has a lot of injuries, but there's really no concerns about the Patriots offense. They got Drake May, who's slinging it and trying his best. But right now, Gerard Mayo was throwing Alex Van Pelt under the bus about their offense. There's just a lot of turmoil there. So the wise guys, if they're betting a big favorite, they're more inclined to bet the Bills than the Packers.
College football presented by JLab. JLab has the best audio products in the game. They're ready to take care of you this football season. Traveling to watch your favorite team or just streaming the game at home, find the Blue Box at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, or go to jlab.com. Love their stuff. The Blue Box. All right, I want to talk some college football now because I do think Indiana-Notre Dame and a lot of its weather. I think it's going to be pretty close. I think Notre Dame's a great run team. Indiana's a kind of a peculiar, unique run defense. I think really good coaches with time can employ, competitive strategies. We know that Ohio State in Columbus on a nice day to play football is better significantly. Notre Dame doesn't have Ohio State's talent. And I also think Indiana now has extra time to prepare. I think Notre Dame has a ceiling offensively, whereas Ohio State doesn't. They just play down to their competition. Notre Dame has a ceiling. And I think Indiana's going to. So I really like Indiana +7. How do the wise
Yeah,
guys
look, the
view it?
numbers come down because wise guys are betting Indiana. And Indiana's, look, been a covering machine this year. Obviously,
Yes.
that Ohio State game was the biggest challenge. They also didn't cover against Michigan, but that was at a time where Michigan was starting to get better. And the next week they went on and they beat Ohio State. So that was a much more physical game. Ohio State, Indiana had some bad plays and they were outclassed and you could see the talent difference. I'm with you. The wise guys are with you in the way Indiana matches up a little bit better with Notre Dame and the time. And look, you can't help but listen to Kurt Signetti and know that he's playing this game and has got his players playing this game with a huge chip on their shoulder. And we've talked about this. One of the reasons Indiana won this year and why it was able to achieve when other teams that are leaning into the portal weren't able to achieve is because they brought in grown-up college football players. They didn't bring in five-star recruits who are going to be there for a year and go to the NFL. They brought in guys who are just really good at college football. And this is a great college football game. And there's a nuanced difference when I say a college football game here. That's the style of game this is going to be. It's going to be physical. It's going to be about execution. It's going to be about not necessarily the best athletes, but the people who do their jobs the best. So I love this game for Indiana.
I like the under on Clemson, Texas, mostly not because Texas is going to score a ton. I don't think Clemson can score much on Texas. I'm going to take Texas minus 12. I really feel it has a chance to be 30-10. I think the Texas defense is sensational. And I think the Clemson offense, it's almost like that SMU game felt like their bowl game. I think both SMU and Clemson are going to get totally outclassed in their bowl games. I like the under, but I'm going to take Texas minus 12. I think this, remember, Clemson doesn't go to the transfer portal.
Yeah.
They have holes. Texas out-recruits them and goes to the transfer portal. And also, Texas's offense over the last 3 weeks, I don't think they'll pause. If Quinn Ewers struggles, I think they'll go to Arch Manning. I don't think they'll pause going forward. I like Texas to roll here. Sharp
Totally
or square.
sharp. Like if you're looking, I'm looking in the Action app right now. I was just checking it out. And you can see in the app, you can see the betting tickets and you can see the money percentages on each side. And betting tickets is usually an indication of the public. That's the squares who are betting $10, $20, and there's a lot of volume of tickets. Money usually represents where the wise guys are. So the tickets right now are on Clemson. The money is on Texas. And I agree with you, and the wise guys agree with you. That defense they have is just fierce. Like they did a job on Georgia. And if Texas's offense could execute a little bit better, then we wouldn't be having this conversation about who is the SEC champ. It would have been Texas. So like that defense is so freaking good, and it's a veteran defense. Again, we're talking about like guys who've been playing college football for a while, and I think that's an advantage here.
So the game I'm going to ask you to handicap, I don't get the line. So the line is telling me Ohio State's going to win because it hasn't moved much. So Tennessee's defensive line is significantly better than Ohio State's offensive line, meaning Ohio State's going to have to throw, and it may only be 15 degrees. But this line is telling me that out after that Michigan loss, Ohio State is pissed, and Ryan Day's job's on the line, and Josh Heupel's isn't, and it's in Columbus, and it is a warm weather SEC team. So the line is telling me that Ohio State's going to win this comfortably. That's what it's telling me. Otherwise, when it came out 7.5, the Sharps would have jumped all over this. I mean, Tennessee's the best rushing team in the SEC going into cold weather. It just screams to you, low scoring, take the points. But the line's not moving, and that tells me the Sharps like Ohio State.
Yeah,
Do
I mean,
they?
look, it's settled in where it's at, right? And that is because it's kind of the advantage is not for Tennessee because of some of these situations that you just talked about. And there is some feeling that this is such a desperate spot for Ryan Day. It's been 7.5 almost since it opened. It was at 6.5 for about 30 seconds. Wise guys took the 6.5. They bet Tennessee at 6.5, right? But there was so much other sentiment coming in on Ohio State that it moved up. So Ryan Day is in a spot, and we've talked about this. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal today about Ohio State fans, people calling in to local radio about Max Crosby, who, the Lions, the Raiders defensive lineman who's out for the year, on his podcast. He's a massive Ohio State fan, talking about how he wants the team to lose so they get rid of Ryan Day. That is a weird thing to be talking about when you've got a coach who has won as much as he has. But I think you and I agree, every game for him is going to be a must-win game. And unless they win the championship or they get there and they are so dominant and he puts himself in a position, even if they lose, it's a way to rebuild the goodwill. It's a Michigan or bust program, and he hasn't beaten them, and they haven't gotten over it.
I think sometimes one of the things I love about sports is when there's cultural changes, I like to predict what they are. I love the theories and my systems on like what's changing. So something's happening in college football, and college football fans don't yet know it. So in the NFL, it's almost understood that you got to give a staff a couple of years, right? Like it's just really hard. The margins are thin. Well, I think the Ohio States and the Georgias and the Texas fans, you've always been able to line up and just beat teams. And one of the reasons is over a long season is your backups were as good as their starters. And football's regulated levels of violence. So there's college and pro, there's injuries. But the transfer portal and NIL has eliminated depth at the blue bloods, Georgia, Texas, Clemson. So when you do suffer injuries and the season is now longer than ever, your backups are Purdue starters. That's all they are. And so these Ohio States and these big Notre Dame, these big traditional powers, as the season goes on, I mean, look at our 12-team playoff. Arizona State's in it, SMU's in it, Boise State's in it. And these are live dogs. And so I don't think quite college football fans understand. Not only are players getting paid that it looks more like pro football, but your backups stink just like pro football. Detroit's defense now has 6 backups. It's terrible. A month ago, it was excellent. And so what creates that? The salary cap. You have bad backups in the NFL. Nobody has depth in the NFL. Philadelphia's got great frontline starters. A.J. Brown's out. It's not the same offense, right? Saquon Barkley's out. It's not the same offense. We've always understood that in pro football. You need your starters. And when you get injury plagued, Buffalo, Detroit's defense, you're like, what the hell's going on? Well, everybody knows you don't have good college. That was never the point. Top 10 teams just had better backups. I mean, 85 scholarships allows you to have 4 pro offensive tackles if you're Ohio State. Now they have 2. One gets hurt. You move a guard to left tackle. Their whole line stinks. It's Iowa at best.
So you're totally right. That's an on the field problem. But culturally, for fandom, the beauty of college football, it's always been Michigan, Ohio State, rivalry weekend, Alabama, Tennessee, or Alabama, Auburn. These games, they had so much meaning because there was a lot on the line. You couldn't lose that game. I think what Ohio State is struggling with and what a lot of schools will struggle with in the future is you focus so much on that one rivalry game, and that's all you care about because college football has always been so provincial. Now it's a national game. The SEC is spread out all over. The Big Ten is literally nationwide. These are the only 2 conferences that really kind of matter. And so the provincial local rivalries that college fan bases have built their mindset on, have built their self-worth on, have built their fandom on, they need to move on from those really meaning anything because they kind of don't. If Ohio State loses to Michigan for the next 10 years, but they win the national title in 5 of those years, is that going to be better or worse? as a fan. Like they need to come to grips with a new reality of what these rivalry games mean in terms of the broader picture, because they used to mean everything. It wasn't just about beating Michigan. It was about beating Michigan and what it meant for winning the Big Ten and going to the Rose Bowl, or what it meant for winning the Big Ten and then being in the college football playoff, or winning the BCS and getting a better rating. Those things don't matter anymore. So the rivalries and the expectations for what these rivalries mean need to be adjusted. I also think it's just going to diminish the value of those games for fans. My kid, he's going to be in college next year. He's gotten into Indiana. He got into Penn State. Wherever he decides to go, are the rivalries for those schools going to mean as much to him 20 years from now as they do to me and my friends who also went to Indiana? Probably not.
This week's college football preview is brought to you by our friends at Cosm, the world's greatest fan experience. If you're in LA or Dallas, you want an immersive football experience, go check out the Indiana-Notre Dame game, Tennessee-Ohio State college football playoff games, both in Cosm, this Friday and Saturday, as well as every game on in the hall. That's cool, too. Join me this Friday, December 20th at Cosm, LA. I'll be watching the Indiana-Notre Dame game. I think it's going to be close. The Battle of Indiana, the Hoosiers travel to South Bend to face the Fighting Irish. I can't wait. Do you have an NFL bet this weekend that you would label your favorite?
Well, look, I middled Kansas City. So I bet Kansas City plus 2.5 on Sunday night. And then
minus two
no,
and
it
a
was
half.
plus 2.5. Like on Monday morning, I'm sorry, when the news about what was happening with Mahomes was still unclear, the Chiefs were 2.5-point underdogs. So I bet him 2.5. And then when it became clear that he was going to be playing, this was yesterday afternoon, the game got up to 3.5. I bet the Texans at plus 3.5. So the majority of my money is trying to get that middle, right? But I also bet the Jets 3.5. That's one that I like. I really like the Steelers at 6.5. So if I like, I'll put in my 5 favorite picks. The Steelers will be in there. The Jets will definitely be in there. Dallas, I bet at 4.5. I like Dallas a lot against Tampa. I think there's a lot of inflation this week. And I think that's one of the bigger games where Dallas has been playing better. Like the last 4 weeks, that Cincinnati game kind of looks like a fluke, right? They lost that game. They've won the 3 other games. Micah Parsons has 7.5 sacks since he's back. Deron Bland is back in the secondary. That defense is getting a lot better. Cooper Rush at home, controlled environment. Tampa Bay just put up 40 on the Chargers. That inflated that line a little bit. So Dallas is another one that I'm paying attention to.
I judge the quality of a fragrance by the compliments you get. When I wore Ovation for the first time, second time, and third time, usually I walk past somebody and they're like, hey, what you got on? Who over there smelling good? You know, that's the injection of confidence right there to you.
That's right. We want to be at the forefront of using the brand as a gateway for these young athletes. Custom suit, we do a photo shoot, we do video, and it's all about that partnership to create a personal brand.
And I love you guys associating it with more sophistication. Throwing a suit on a kid, sometimes it takes for you to see yourself with a suit on in the mirror to be like, hey, I have more to offer.
Ovation for Men, we're part of Amazon's Black Business Accelerator. You know, Amazon has invested $150 million for the next 4 years to uplift small businesses like myself to scale. You know, Amazon is really putting their money where their mouth is.
They're committed to excellence on every level. They want to scale these businesses to be amongst the best in whatever industry they're in.
You've always been authentic. You've always been pushing excellence.
Well, I appreciate that.
As our slogan says, every man deserves an ovation.
Yes, sir.
Listen, this relationship with Ovation for Men, Richard Sherman, The Volume, this is just the beginning.
I appreciate you guys letting me be a part of your journey. If you haven't already checked them out, go out there, get your man some. And get the sport too. And it can be Christmas, birthday, holidays, or yesterday. But make sure you get it.